Employers have figured out what farm workers have been contributing to the process, the democratic process behind the bill, just like the employers are. And they have already felt the retaliation just for this. Can you imagine what they face when they come forward to talk about workplace safety or their pay? I can. You want to know why I can? Because I sat through hours of testimony and I actually listened to them. Thank you, Madam President. I want to address a few things that were just brought up. First of all, we did push out the effective date for most of the bill. Anything that has to do with the way that ag employers pay their employees have been pushed out until as far as we could, farther than you even said, January 31st, 2022. Another thing that was just brought up was, why do people keep coming back? They must be treated so well or else they wouldn't keep coming back. Clearly you didn't hear yesterday, folks, when I said the first time that I heard that tired out old argument was in a documentary about the farm worker movement from 1962. Well, if the workers weren't treated well, why would they come back and work for us? There clearly couldn't be any problems there. Want to know why they come back, even when they're treated poorly, exploited, and yes, abused? Because they have no other option, okay? We're not talking about farmers who pay their workers $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year. That's great if that's the reality for some producers. Fantastic. We're talking about farm workers who earn $2 and $3 and $4 an hour, because that is still legal. And it still happens. A solution in search of a problem? If you don't think that it is wrong that workers in this state are still allowed to earn $3 an hour because they happen to be employed in the agricultural industry, then sure, you might think that this bill is in search of a problem. That's a problem. That's exploitation. That is inhumane. If you don't think it's a problem that ag workers are not allowed to earn overtime simply because they happen to work in the industry, then sure, then this bill is in search of a problem. No, that is a problem. That is unlike almost any other worker in the state. That is a problem that we have to solve. We heard folks from the ag industry describe the severe weather, the lengthy hours that people are forced to work through. You know who bears the brunt of that? Alongside the producers and the employers? The employees, who are forced to work in those extreme conditions for 60, 80, 90 hours a week. In extreme conditions, doing hard manual labor. And yet, because they happen to labor in the industry, those employers are not required to pay them overtime. That is wrong. Fundamentally wrong. Another problem, they're not allowed to organize. So when they have an issue that they would like to bring forward, like, I don't know, the fact that they're earning $4 an hour when they're working 80, 90 hours a week, they could be fired and punished, or worse, deported, just for coming forward. If they spoke to another one of their fellow workers about their working conditions, they face severe, swift, vicious retaliation. That is a problem. This bill solves that problem too. The ironic thing about this is the organizations that are ginning up so much opposition in the agricultural community, they have the ability to organize, to come together, to work together to oppose a piece of legislation. And you know what? They have every right to do so. You know who doesn't have a right to do that? The workers. They are not allowed to even come together to discuss, as co-workers, their abysmal working conditions and the treatment that they must endure. That's illegal. That's a problem. That's one of the many problems that this bill solves. I think it's a problem that because these people labor in the agricultural industry, they are not guaranteed food, water, or rest breaks. That's a problem. And I think it's a problem that because these people labor in the agricultural industry, they are retaliated against in the most fierce and swift fashion that I have ever seen. It is the most vulnerable working population in the state. And when they come forward to complain about their problems, they receive retribution like you cannot believe. It is the most fearful workforce I have ever interacted with. And I've been working on workers' rights legislation for 7 years in this building. That is a problem. These are basic human rights that are denied to these people because they happen to work in this industry. Yes, agriculture has unique attributes from any other industry. And like we mentioned before, the people who are behind this bill, myself included, farm workers, labor rights groups, civil rights groups, racial justice groups, faith-based groups, Latino organizations all across the state, they have all come together around this policy because this group of people have been discriminated against for decades, for generations, plural. When almost every other worker in this state was guaranteed these basic human rights, these folks were carved out. These folks and domestic workers. And that is a relic from our past that we are not proud of. This is not a solution in search of a problem. This is a bill that addresses some severe problems. A way forward to bring these people the basic human rights that they should be guaranteed just like every other worker in the state. And contrary to what my colleague from Sterling just described, this isn't at all a one-size-fits-all bill. We have sent the very things that were mentioned before to the rulemaking process, and perhaps we need a refresher on how that works. Because how that works is, there is a very public process through the Department of Labor that is set up precisely to allow all sides of this issue to weigh in and craft the rules so that the bill can be implemented properly. Guess who has a seat at the table? Employers. Guess who has a seat at the table? Employees. And they'll work it out. That's what rulemaking means. He also described some confusion, apparently, that some people are experiencing around the provisions in the bill for organizing and whether this bill applies to a company with 1 employee or 8 or more. Read the bill. It is clearly laid out and defined. These rights that we are for the first time ever restoring to these people apply to all workers, regardless of the size of your company. So yes, my colleague from Sterling also said it would be really hard for us to move out of the state because we want to avoid the implications of the bill. So these employers are opposed to the bill because they don't want to pay the minimum wage, or they don't want to pay overtime. They don't want to guarantee rest breaks, food and water for folks who are toiling in the field in extreme heat. They're opposed to providing shade. Or are they opposed to giving these people the ability to work together to try and advocate for themselves? I would be ashamed if my dad was opposed to any of those things, or my granddad, or my great-grandfather, who were all in this industry, who all farmed on our land. They wouldn't oppose any bit of that, and they certainly wouldn't oppose the provisions in the bill that protect people from retaliation. Let's be clear. This bill comes on the end of 60 years of struggle for people who have worked in the movement for their entire lives, for values that we say we share as Coloradans. And we even put our names on, quite literally, when most recently we observe a statewide holiday to honor the life and work of Cesar Chavez, who devoted his career and his life to these exact issues. Every one of us voted yes and co-sponsored a measure applauding the man for his accomplishments. Every single one of those accomplishments, the minimum wage, getting people the right to organize, banning the short-handled hoe, food and water and rest breaks, all of those things are in this bill. It is time to walk the walk and talk the talk and do what's right for these people. They put the food on our tables, day in and day out, quite literally, the basics of what all of our families depend on. And yet, Colorado condones the legal exploitation of this workforce. The legal exploitation of this workforce. It's despicable. And this bill is long overdue. And we wouldn't be an outlier. We would join states that are close to us in geographic proximity and in what they produce. We're not just talking about California. Colorado is far behind other states when it comes to workers' rights for ag. And what we're hearing from the workers themselves is that they're going elsewhere. Because states like Nebraska, Kansas, Texas, Arizona, not to mention Minnesota, New York, Maryland, South Dakota, and yes, California, treat their workers better and pay them fairly. So if you want to keep this workforce that the ag industry employers depend on, we need to start protecting them. If you don't want to do it for the civil rights aspect of the thing, then do it for the bottom line. My friend from Sterling also said that we heard in committee ag producers coming forward to talk about their experiences and why they're opposed to the bill. But he didn't mention the hours of testimony that we had from farm workers and the representatives who were there to represent them, because yes, they were out working, or they were so fearful of retaliation that they couldn't even take time to get on a Zoom to tell us their own story. And I can also tell you that during the course of this bill, they have been retaliated against since then for participating in the bill moving forward. Employers have figured out what farm workers have been contributing to the process, the democratic process behind the bill, just like the employers are. And they have already felt the retaliation just for this. Can you imagine what they face when they come forward to talk about workplace safety or their pay? I can. You want to know why I can? Because I sat through hours of testimony and I actually listened to them. And what they described has been related to us in this legislature since the early 60s, before I was even born. This is not new. These problems exist now, and they have existed for generations. We had people describe being fired for coming forward. We had people describe dropped pay for coming forward with any kind of a claim. We had people coming forward to talk about the extreme hours that they were forced to work for weeks and months on end. We had people coming forward to describe how they were still paid on a per unit basis during harvest, so that they literally pulled in $3 an hour when they worked 80 hours a week. We had people coming forward to describe the sexual abuse that they experienced at the hands of their employers, not unlike what we heard in the 60s. I listened to those people. Yes, I spent the last 2 months listening to the business owners tell us why they can't implement this bill. And we made changes according to legitimate concerns in order to do what's right for the state, out of respect for the industry that my family was built on, and yours. However, do not diminish the problems that are caused currently for these people by the state of Colorado standing by and condoning this kind of legal exploitation. There are 50,000 people in the state of Colorado who work in the industry, and some of them are treated very well, and for that I'm grateful, okay? A lot of agricultural producers have wonderful relationships with their employees, open relationships where they can, happy relationships where they're treated well and paid fairly. I described all of that yesterday. It is an acknowledgement that we have made on the front end of this from day one. But likewise, the industry needs to acknowledge the treatment of the employees that they depend on. This is finally a step forward where we can, for once and for all, say these workers deserve the same basic human rights that almost every single other worker in the state has enjoyed for generations on end. If you are concerned about these claims being filed against you, that means that you're in violation of the provisions I just described. And yes, that will be up to a judge to decide if the claims are frivolous or valid. And then the judge will decide what the penalty should be. Again, very common in labor law. So, you shouldn't expect to have claims filed or judges ruling against you or financial penalties if you pay workers the minimum wage, if you pay your workers overtime, which, by the way, unlike what my colleague from Sterling said, has been entirely kicked to rulemaking, where the industry has a chance to weigh in on how those rules are crafted. If you fire your employees for trying to organize, or, I don't know, join a union. If you don't do that, you won't have a claim filed against you. If you don't deny your workers food, water, rest breaks, shade, you won't get a claim filed against you. If you don't retaliate against your workers for coming forward with problems, penalize them or fire them, deport them for trying to advocate for themselves, you won't face a claim. So, I urge an aye vote on the measure. And again, acknowledging that the bulk of the industry, the majority of farmers and ranchers, producers across the state, are good and decent and hardworking human beings who treat people fairly and pay them well. But for those of you who are not aware of the kind of exploitation that occurs and what it means to people and their families, it is real, it is severe, it's a problem. We should, as Coloradans, be extraordinarily ashamed of it, and we have a chance now to right that wrong and do what's right for civil justice, racial justice, and basic worker rights. I urge an aye vote on Senate Bill 87.